Good afternoon. It's a genuine pleasure to kick off the second of the distinguished seminar series. The tagline is inspiration, and the title of the series is Provocative Conversations on the Future of Higher Education. And it is absolutely a pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Maria Klawe is the president of Harvey Mudd College. She is the 5th president of Harvey Mudd College and is in fact the first woman to lead the college since the founding in 1955. Prior to joining Harvey Mudd, she was the Dean of Engineering at Princeton, also a professor of computer science. At both Princeton and at Harvey Mudd, one of the hallmarks of what she has done was to lead extraordinarily ambitious strategic planning efforts. I got to see some of the one at Princeton because I was an alum and got to follow this as it was playing out, and know that the work at Harvey Mudd titled Envisioning the Future has been similarly forward-thinking and ambitious. And this is part of the reason why Maria is one of our thought leaders who's part of the series, as somebody who does think about the future of higher education and what are going to be the changes that are going to be so critical, and what are the challenges that we're facing in higher education. Just a few notes about her career. Prior to Princeton, she was at University of British Columbia, where she served as the Dean of Science, Vice President of Student and Academic Services, and head of the Department of Computer Science. She's a distinguished computer scientist and mathematician with research contributions in actually many facets of both math and computer science, but also in gender issues, in information technology, and interactive multimedia for mathematics education, and has broken new ground in really every field where she's worked. She is one of 10 members of the board of Microsoft Corporation. She's a board member for Broadcom and for the nonprofit Math for America. She's a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a trustee for the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute in Berkeley, and a member of both the Stanford Engineering Advisory Council and the Advisory Council for the Computer Science Teachers Association. So with broad interests and impact everywhere she's been, it's my genuine pleasure to welcome Maria Klawe.
Thank you, Leah. Now, when I'm actually talking at Harvey Mudd College, and I have a bunch of students in a room, and I see, only 2 people in the front 2 rows, I actually make the students at the back come up to the front. Now, I don't know if that would work here, but I could try. Okay. First of all, I feel very privileged to be part of this lecture series and to be able to be here with you today. I've known Leah for at least 20 years, and the first time I met her, she was talking about epics, and I was just so impressed that she immediately became one of my role models that I thought about in terms of, leadership in engineering education. And even at that time, I knew that she was a superstar researcher as well, but what I loved was that she'd taken this sort of, in collaboration with a couple of other faculty, had taken this detour in her career, and I've loved watching her become, first of all, an associate dean and being involved in starting the School for Engineering Education, and then moving on and becoming the dean here. So Leah is one of those people in the world, I have a few of them, who if they ask you to do something, I just say, definitely, I'm doing that. Okay, so here's the outline for my talk. I'm going to talk a bit about who's underrepresented where, the reasons for underrepresentation, what works in increasing participation. Then I'm going to talk about the imposter panel, and I'm going to close by telling you this story about Harvey Mudd College and how the faculty there dramatically increased the percentage of our computer science majors who are female. And the one thing I want to say is, I've been very interested in increasing the participation of women in areas of science and engineering for a long time. And I've actually worked at other institutions on the issue about increasing the participation of females in computer science. But I can tell you, I did nothing at MUD. It was really all our computer science faculty members. They made it happen, and it's been pretty exciting. You know, if you standing around, there are all of these great chairs. They're very comfortable. I promise not to spit on you. Well, not deliberately. Okay, so who's underrepresented where? Undergraduate degrees. Well, let's first of all talk about women. You know, there are some areas where women are quite well represented in undergraduate engineering. Bio or biomedical engineering tends to be a good one, chemical engineering, civil environmental engineering, but pretty much all the other areas, mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, electrical engineering, they tend not to be well represented. And if you look at science, and I understand that computer science here is in the Faculty of Science or the College of Arts and Sciences, and so there can be debate about whether computer science is engineering or science. I'm not going to get into that, but wherever it is, participation of women tends to be right now about 12%, between 11 and 14%. And in physics, it tends to be about 20%. So if we start looking at underrepresented minorities, African Americans are incredibly underrepresented in all areas of engineering and in science. Also Hispanics, Native Americans, LGBT, people with disabilities. And you know, one of the people who's a friend of mine and someone whose work I've watched for probably about 30 years at this point is Richard Ladner at the University of Washington. And Richard's parents were deaf, and so he grew up as being part of the deaf community. And he's been doing research on trying to make science and engineering and sort of all of the information that we take for granted on the internet today much more accessible to people who are deaf and blind or who have other disabilities. And I think it's one of the areas where, you know, I know at my own college, we're absolutely tiny, and we will have faculty tell us, how could you admit a legally blind student? And we're going like, excuse me? It's the law. You cannot not admit somebody because they have a disability. And they're going, but you know, there are all these things that have to happen for this student, who I will say is doing extremely well, for us to accommodate it. And we're going, yes, it's the law. We will pay for the accommodations. And you know, I think science and engineering are areas where we probably have been surprisingly given that much of the research in biomedical engineering has to do with increasing accessibilities. I think we have not perhaps made as much progress as we probably will in the next decade in terms of how do we not just do more research around technology to enable people with disabilities for full participation, but how do we actually recruit them into engineering and science and make sure that they thrive? But the point I want to make about all of this is, yeah, it's not really about being female or black. I mean, yeah, it is about being female and black. It's about the fact that traditionally, the culture of engineering and also the culture of science, and I think also the culture of many areas in the humanities, tends to be comfortable for people who look like the norm and be pretty uncomfortable for anyone who differs from the norm. And so a lot of, when I think about diversity this year, I mean, I started out, as I've told many people, I started out as a boy, or at least a boy wannabe. I mean, I was probably between 7 and 9 when I finally gave up waking every morning expecting to have grown the appropriate physical attributes of a boy, because I was so sure I was a boy. And I finally, you know, realized it just, you know, I got old enough, it wasn't going to happen. And this was, you know, facilitated by my father, to whom I was his son. I was the second of 2 kids. We had a girl like my older sister Anna was very girl-like, a very good daughter, very helpful in the kitchen, helpful with all the things the girls were supposed to do, and I was the son. And then 2 more girls came along, but I stayed being the boy. And so, you know, I started out with a very narrow view on why we need to change the culture so that women could participate, because I just didn't like being kept out of the candy store. All the good things, all the things I wanted were for boys. But as I've become older, and now I'm very old, but I think Leah's older by maybe a couple of months. I gotta say, one of the things I say about being old is it's so nice having silver hair. I was told I was not allowed to call it white or gray. Somebody over there. It's so nice having this color of hair because people actually listen to you. However, as I grew older, what I really realized was it wasn't just women that felt like they didn't belong. It was a much broader range of people. And so what this talk is really about is, science and engineering is really important for the future of this country. We can't afford not to include all the people who have the ability to contribute. And so one of our tasks, and I think one of the things that Purdue has an enormous opportunity to do as it has this incredible growth opportunity, is how do we change the culture so it becomes a culture that's supportive of everyone who has talent, initiative, ability, and is willing to put in the effort. Okay, let's talk about who's underrepresented as full professors. Okay. Everybody, and I'm thrilled to hear that 57 of the professors in the College of Engineering are female, 17%. That's really good for an engineering school. I'm sure it's going to get even better over the next few years as you hire more people. But one of the things that I found really interesting is, more than 50% of the undergraduate degrees go to chemistry, and in biology and chemistry go to females. Almost 50% in those fields go to females, not quite, low 40s. If you look at the top institutions, the number of women who are full professors is tiny. And one of the pieces of data I heard maybe about a month ago was, okay, I don't know how many medical schools there are in this country, but it's got to be at least a couple of hundred, probably more. There's a couple of hundred colleges of engineering. For the last 30 years, 50% of medical degrees has gone to females. The number of deans, female deans of medical schools, 7. I mean, so who cares? I mean, why does it matter that, we want to increase diversity? I mean, after all, society's done reasonably well in the last so many years. Well, I think there are lots of different reasons. One of them is that careers in science and engineering, I think, are just amazing opportunities. And for our young people, I want all young people to have access to those opportunities. I mean, it's not just that they're well paid, it's not just that they tend to be careers that allow you to have flexibility to travel, all of those kinds of things. It's that these are careers that give you an opportunity to change the world. And I think everybody, in really important ways, I think everybody deserves to have access to that. The second reason is that there's a big demand for more particular engineering and computer science degrees, less so, I would say, for life science degrees. But there's a huge demand right now around the world. And I would say that to a large extent, the future economy of this country and other countries depends on our ability to educate well more engineers and computer scientists. But the third reason I think is the most important of all is that there's lots of research that shows that if you have a diverse team of people working on a problem, you get a better solution. And it doesn't matter whether it's in business or in education. And it doesn't, when I'm talking about diversity, I mean diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of perspective. And so, for example, on my senior leadership team, I like to have people that disagree with me. I'm capable of having my own opinion. I need other opinions, because it's by bringing together a wide range of opinions and perspectives that you actually figure out better solutions. And I cannot tell you how many times, somebody around the table has said, well, I think direction A would be good, and somebody else goes, yeah, but what about B? And those people over in C, they're going to think A is really a bad idea, and then somebody else will say, well, how about A prime? And so it goes, that, you know, by having lots of diverse ideas and perspectives around the table, you get better perspectives. And I will say the worst thing about cultures that are narrow in terms of the kind of people who will feel comfortable and embraced is that they tend to not only have diversity of race and gender and other kinds of things, they have they tend not just to lack diversity of race, gender, and other things, they lack diversity of perspective and thought. They tend to have much more monolithic sets of beliefs. So, why don't those people, whoever they are, that are underrepresented, why aren't they participating? Well, as I once heard Alan Fisher, who was one of the people at Carnegie Mellon who participated in the work they did on looking at why there were so few women majoring in computer science there, it was about 7% female when they started looking at the undergraduate level. And Alan Fisher once said, it's not rocket science, it's really straightforward, and that is true. So, first reason is, the reason that people don't go into the fields, lack of interest. They think it's boring. Second one is they think, in general, this is not an area they will do well in. And, you know, their reasons for feeling that could be often unconscious bias by teachers, counselors, students, peers, and family members. And I know how often I heard as a girl growing up that girls were not good at math. I was the top math student in my school. I was one of the two top math students, not just the year I was in, but over probably a decade at my university as an undergraduate. And yet I still heard day in, day out, why do you want to be a mathematician? There are no good female mathematicians. And, you know, of course it's a long time ago since I was an undergraduate student or a high school student, but I regularly talk to high school students, first-year university students, and graduate students, and I'll say, raise your hand if somebody at some point during high school or undergraduate or middle school said something that implied that girls were not as good at math and science. And I will tell you, the majority of young women will raise their hand. So we'll just do it today. How many of you heard this at some point? Okay, so, you know, and, you know, it's the same for African Americans and Latino, Latina, Native Americans. And it's not, for the most part, that these things get said because people are trying to actively, I mean, the professors that said this to me, they weren't actively trying to discourage me. They felt I had all these other talents and I was picking a path that was going to be so much more difficult because there were no good female mathematicians. And so that I was going to always be facing this bias. But of course, occasionally there's explicit bias. And I like to tell as an example of this, I arrive at Princeton, first female dean of engineering. There's a tea party in the faculty neighborhood that we've moved into. And the next door neighbor held a tea party, and one of the faculty members who attended with his spouse was a member of the engineering department, engineering school. And he walked up to me, literally, the first thing he said to me, he says, I don't have to listen to a word that you say. You only got this job because you're female. Okay, this is actually summer of 2003. And I just looked at him and I said, excuse me? I do know my being female has been a positive factor in some of the jobs I've gotten in the past, but in this case it was really negative because President Tillman, Shirley Tillman, had come under a lot of flack for appointing a whole bunch of female administrators. And she told me when she offered me the job, she said, you know, Maria, I'd way rather be offering it to male because I'm going to get still more flack, but you're the best candidate. He just turned around and walked away. But another thing that influences, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, that influences women and underrepresented minorities and men as well, something called the imposter syndrome. And the imposter syndrome is simply that it looks like you're moderately successful. People think that you have done a lot with your life or whatever, and you constantly have this feeling, this internal feeling that you're failing. And no matter how much success happens, you carry that around. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But the problem is that women and other underrepresented groups in engineering tend to carry this more. And one of the things that happens is, so you're a sophomore in engineering, you got A's in your first year courses, and now you're taking a course, let's say it's a circuits course, and for the first time you get a B in an exam. And you're female or a minority student, and you go like, I knew I didn't belong here. But if you're a male student, you're going, boy, that was a stupid exam. Wow, you know, that prof really asked the wrong questions. I know I'm so much better than the grade that I got. So one of the things we know from research is if you take a group of females and a group of males and you match them for success, at whatever level of success you want. Let's say they're all high school valedictorians, the top student in their high school. If you look at them 2 years later in college and you ask them to tell you how they're doing, the females will underestimate how well they're doing and the males will overestimate how well they're doing. And so one of the things about perceived lack of ability is women underestimate their lack of ability. And that's one of the reasons why if you look at many engineering schools, the best students in your class may well be the female students, because they had to be so much better than the average to believe they could actually belong. And you know, this is one of the things we're all trying hard to work on, so that yes, the students who are just female and just average excellent students will actually be in your class too. And then the other thing is this sense of not belonging, being the other. And I remember talking to a couple of computer science alums from MUD. They graduated, you know, sometime 2006, 2007. And I was asking them a couple of years later, how many females were there in your year as a CS major? And one of them said, just one. And the other one said, no, remember that there was that other person, she didn't hang out with us, but technically she was a CS major. She just didn't spend time doing the things we like to do. And they said, oh yeah, you're right, that wasn't a real CS major. So this perception that to belong, you must have the same kinds of interests and participate in the same kinds of activities is pretty strong in some disciplines. So now, you might say, yeah, but you know, why does this have, you know, what is this interest and ability thing? Don't they realize there are great jobs out there? If you grew up in China or India, your parents are going to very strongly encourage you to go to be educated in an area where there are job opportunities. If you grew up in the United States or Canada, and I suspect in Europe as well, but definitely for North America, you get told, do what you love, do what you're good at, and you'll have a great career. Well, if the majority of our young women and African American and Hispanic students, Native American students, gay students, students with disabilities, think that they won't like it and they won't be good at it, no wonder they're not here. And then one of the things we also know is, and it's probably related to the reasons above, is that we tend to see lower persistence in the face of difficulty. And for example, when I arrived at Princeton, I was told that the departure rate for females and male students of color was in the first 2 years of engineering, was twice that of white males. And it was true. I looked at the data. And if we look today in technology careers, women are twice as likely to leave a technical career within the first 10 years of starting a job than men are. So, you know, and I will say, if you're in a technical career, if you're in an engineering program, you will face difficulty. I mean, what we do is hard, it's challenging, it takes real persistence. And so if we have a culture where women, for whatever, and other underrepresented groups, for whatever reason, feel they don't belong, who feel they're not as good, even though they're doing just as well, it's not surprising that they end up not being there. So, given those things, it's pretty easy to address this. Increase interest, increase confidence and ability, increase a sense of belonging, and increase persistence. And one of the things I love about what has happened here at Purdue is simply by changing the Introduction to Engineering course and making it hands-on, experiential, making it fun, making it project-based, and yes, it's very challenging. First-year retention has gone up from being roughly 79% to 89%. Well, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It increased interest. I think because it's very team-based, that tends to increase confidence and ability. It made them feel they have this place downstairs, I believe, in Armstrong, where they have a sense of belonging. And yes, it increased persistence. So, increasing interest. Traditionally, the way we have taught engineering, and I know Purdue has moved away from this, is you hear all the theory first, and then you get to do the fun applications after you've got all the math and physics and chemistry and whatever else you were supposed to get. There's no particular reason it has to be that way, as the Intro to Engineering course points out. You can actually start students working on really fun things early on. One of the things that I learned from doing some joint programs with IBM 15 years ago, when I had a chair that was partially funded by them to recruit more women to science and engineering, was how important prizes are. I mean, it's ridiculous, but if you do a competition and you hand out trivial prizes, let's say pens with feathers attached, or bouncy balls or whatever, you get a level of buy-in. So a great example of this is the Grace Hopper Conference, Celebration of Women in Computing. I think we might have both been speakers at the very first one. Wow, that's hard to believe. Were you talking about epics?
Not the first one.
Not the first one, okay. This is a conference, the next one's in Minneapolis, October 2nd through 5th. You should all go because, first of all, it's close. I think it's fairly close. Secondly, male or female, being around 3,000 technical women who are really having fun is so inspirational. I mean, it will really change your view of women in engineering, women in computer science. But the thing they do is, the companies who all want to recruit more women, they bring all this swag, and it is the most ridiculous swag things you've ever seen. But our students, we took 51 first-year female students to Baltimore. We take every incoming female student who wants to go, independent major that they're interested in. We take them to this conference because we think going to start a really challenging four-year educational experience at MUD. Let's give you some inspiration early on. And they come back with these grab bags of ridiculous stuff. It's Post-it notes. I mean, how many thumb drives can you have? Well, apparently never enough. So team competitions with prizes, making it fun, it goes a long way. There are some great websites that have been developed with funding from NSF, Engineer Your Life and .diva.org. They're both at WGBH. I believe. Did you know, I mean, just even though our students, for the most part, are not motivated by salary, it's pretty amazing that starting salaries for CS grads today, I mean, we're seeing an average of between $80,000 and over $100,000 for a BSc. I mean, that's ridiculous, but it's true. Okay, confidence. One of the things that I think is important for all of us is to understand that every single one of us brings unconscious bias to everything we do. And it's important to know that about yourself because a recent study from Yale, they asked, I think it was 127 scientists, male and female, to evaluate two identical resumes. They only got one resume. One was for John and the other one was for Jennifer, but otherwise they were identical. And both the male and the female scientists underrated Jennifer compared to John, both in terms of how successful they were going to be, how likely you would be to hire them as a technician in your lab, and how much you'd want to pay them. I mean, anyhow, if you Bing, Microsoft Board, Google, Project Implicit, you will find a whole bunch of online things you can do that will help you find out for yourself what those biases are. The second one is encouragement is incredibly important, but research shows that encouragement without also implying that there are high standards that need to be achieved and that the student or young faculty member will need to work hard to do that is much less effective. So what works is, of course, getting an undergraduate degree or graduate degree or tenure as a faculty member at Purdue is challenging. It requires hard work, it requires talent, and requires persistence. But making it clear that all of those things are true and that you have confidence that individuals will actually succeed at them has an enormous effect in terms of persistence and developing confidence. And then finally, host an imposter panel with some successful underrepresented alumni or local folks. So the imposter panel. One of my first PhD student at UBC, her name is Corey Inkpen Quinn. She's a senior researcher and manager at Microsoft now. And I will tell you that when she had no intention of doing a PhD, I had to drag, she had no intention of going to graduate school. She did her undergraduate at Dalhousie in Halifax in Nova Scotia, and she had some faculty who said, "You are going to graduate school." So she applied and she came to UBC. And she started working with me in her first year, and I just kept on going, "You are going to get a PhD." And she did. And has done extremely well. But about 4 or 5 years ago, she emailed me and said, "Maria, I'm thinking about submitting a proposal to the Grace Hopper Conference about the imposter syndrome. And my idea is we could pick 5 women in computer science or engineering who most people think of as being highly successful, and then each one of them will talk about feeling like an imposter." I said, "Oh, that's a great idea." And she said, so you and I are going to be 2 of the 5. We've got 3 more. And we each put together a series of slides, and I'm going to show you the ones from mine. They have been updated slightly since then. Okay, so I was the presidential imposter. You know, she was the senior research scientist imposter. Oh. Okay. All right, I put these out of order. Never mind. I'm going to skip forward. I've been taught how to do this. Okay, so this is what it should have said. An imposter's career. So, you know, this is sort of, you know, there's where I got my PhD, and you can sort of see I did various things, and here I am. And so then the person had to complete the sentence, "I feel like an imposter when I," and for me, it's when I start doing something new that is something that successful people do, since I don't see myself as being successful, and also something that women don't often do. So if you put those 2 things together, and it's something new, I will enter into those activities feeling extremely uncomfortable and sure I'm going to fail. So here's, you know, like my parents did not have a lot of money. They were amazing people. They were academics. They were extremely supportive. But, you know, those were in the days when there were 4 kids and academics did not earn a lot of money. So we did not eat in restaurants or take taxis or stay in hotels. So, you know, when I first started having to take taxis by myself, I'm going like, this is crazy. I mean, you want me to get into a car with a stranger and expect that they're going to take them where I want to go in a city like New York City? I mean, oh my God. I was very uncomfortable eating in public for a long time. I mean, it felt so uncomfortable because I'd never eaten any place outside of my home or friends' homes. And, you know, as my career went on, you know, I got used to those things. I'm perfectly capable of riding a taxi today. I'm okay in nice hotels. I can give talks at Stanford. I will tell you, riding up the elevator to my first Microsoft board meeting, I'm going like, oh, they know I should not be here. Actually, now they probably know I should not have been there, but still. I asked way too many questions, apparently. Okay, so, and then we asked each person to fill in how they coped with it. And for me, and I don't think mine are particularly different from most other people, the first one is, of course, practice. If you do something often enough, eventually it becomes easy, no matter how difficult it was initially. The second one is just to get used to that voice inside of my head that goes, Maria, you are such a failure. And, you know, it's amazing. So I'm packing to come here yesterday. I'm going, this is crazy. This is totally crazy. Everything in my life is crazy. And then I'm stopping myself, like, what are you talking about? You don't want to go to Purdue? No, I want to go to Purdue, but I haven't been home for, you know, I mean, it's just like, so anyway, I have this voice in my head. And what's interesting is that, so there's this voice on this side of my head, but every single day, as well as that voice, I wake up with a voice on the other side of my head that goes, I can change the world. And so part of it is I accept the fact that I'll always have that part, and which I will say is deeply reinforced by how my daughter views her mother, that I am a failure. I will tell you, I was awful to my parents. So, you know, my mother, when my daughter was 6 years old, she looks, oh, Maria, you deserve this so much. So anyway, I'm very proud of both my daughter and my son, but I will tell you, particularly my daughter, she has real doubts as to how successful I am. I surround myself with support. It's not just that I have a very supportive husband who's amazing, but I have a lot of friends like Leah, other women who are leading, you know, having an enormous impact in the world, taking on very challenging roles. And if I say to Leah, you know, I'm pretty discouraged about how my faculty reacted to this particular issue, she'll be able to go, yeah, got that. You know, I mean, it's having a community of people, both men and women, who are extremely supportive. And then, of course, it helps to look back. I mean, it helps to remember that very first talk I gave at Stanford in the Algorithms for Lunch Bunch group, news group, and remembering how terrified I was and how well it went. And I was terrified because I thought the result I was presenting was too easy. And I thought they're going to look at me and they're going to laugh me out of the room. They loved it. They could understand it. It was a great talk. Okay, going back to increasing a sense of belonging. I think it's really important that we very consciously create environments that, you know, I look at every single piece of brochure, website, whatever represents Harvey, my college, and make sure that we have women, men, African Americans, Latino, Latinas, I mean, just so that you can see that we have a diverse population. And I will tell you that even before we were basically gender balanced, I would make sure that all of our brochures, every single way we represented it was gender balanced. Because I certainly know, I remember as Dean of Engineering, you'd think I didn't have enough to do with my time, but every Dean of Engineering gets brochures from every other Dean of Engineering in the country. And I just would flip through them. And you know, I can tell you I got some that had several hundred photos, I mean, photos of not several hundred photos, but photos of covering several hundred people in them. 0, 1, or 2 females out of those photographs. And I'll tell you, if I'm a female engineer, I don't feel like I belong in a place that does that. But another big thing is that, you know, a lot of people who might think about becoming engineers are worried that their other interests are going to be something they have to hide. And so I think it's important to really let prospective students at all levels and prospective faculty members know that this is a place, this is a community where we value expression and talent across broad areas. And I heard that we have someone here who's champion ballroom dancer, and I think that's fabulous. And NOVA, again, WGBH, has a series about the secret lives of scientists and engineers where they do very short videos. I'm one of them, My Secret Life. I'm an artist, and I ride a longboard. That's at least what's in the video. It's true. And then, obviously, one of the things that I think works really well is giving your students, and EPICS is a perfect example, an opportunity to use their knowledge to actually help in the community. Because often what we find for underrepresented groups is the ability to actually see that what they have learned in the classroom can make a difference in the real world is something that helps persistence. So back through this. Okay, now I'm going to close with the Harvey Mudd College story. So let me start first with just our trajectory in terms of female students overall. When the college was founded, there was an argument between the board and the founding president about whether it should be a men's college. And the board, somebody on the board said to the founding president, after all, no one would want to marry a female engineer. And he went, I did. And he, sorry, female mathematician. He went, I did. And, but so when they started out, they had a cap of 11%. Okay, that's a weird number. I have no idea where it came from, on the percentage of students who could be female. And by the time roughly 15 years came around, they were just over 20% female. And when I arrived in 2006, I'm very grateful that the president before me in those 9 years had managed to get the percentage up to 32, and it was a very deliberate, and he worked really hard on it, John Strauss. By 2010, we were 42% female, and we're currently 45% female. And I will tell you, you know, our incoming classes over the last 4 years have been 40%, then 51.5%, then back to 43%, and then 48.5%. And, you know, so one of the things that I think you have to expect when you're working hard on this stuff is that you will see some fluctuations. But overall, we have steadily, well, not steadily because we'd have bumps, but we've been moving percentage forward. Faculty, oh yeah, and this year it's 48% female. Female faculty, we were about 20% in 1997. We were about a third by the time I got here. Again, previous president worked really hard on this. And we're about 40% in 2010. And I was just watching in the year after that, 4 out of 5 who got tenure were female, and 4 out of 5 who were recruited that year were female. And I would say we are, you know, we're going to be 50% female. I'm also really happy to say that we've been working hard in recruiting African American faculty, and we've made some real progress in that. So, yes. No, that's the school as a whole. Yeah, and so we are a science and engineering school. We don't have any other majors. We do have a department that's called Humanities, Social Sciences, and the Arts, because our students take 30% of their credits in that area. But I will tell you that the female faculty are equally distributed across the departments. The students are fairly equally distributed. I would guess the only area where they're really underrepresented in 2006 was computer science, where there were about 10% of the majors, female students. There are about 20 to 25% of the majors in physics, and they're probably, I would say, about 35 to 40% of the majors in engineering. So, and then it's about 50-50 for chemistry and biology. So, what happened in 2005, the year before I arrived, was that a young woman named Christine Alvarado arrived in the CS department. And Christine did her undergrad at Dartmouth. She had a great experience. Then she went to do her PhD at MIT. And for the first time in her life, she met students and faculty who said to her, you only are here, you only got in because you're a female. And it bugged her. So when she got to Mudd and found that we were 10% female, she decided it was time to do something about it. Unfortunately, there were a number of other faculty members who were interested as well. So one of the things that is true at Mudd is that every student in the first semester has to take a CS course. They also have to take math courses, physics, chemistry, writing, etc. But that meant that we had the opportunity to either really engage students in loving computer science in the first semester or totally turn them off. Well, you could tell that we were turning off at least the female students by being at the 10% number. So we changed the intro course. I'll say a little bit about it in a moment. Equally important, we eliminated something I'll call student macho behavior. So how many of you have taken a computer science or computer engineering course at some point in your life? Okay, we got a fair number. So a pretty common experience is you're in the first course, and there are a couple of students in that course who are incredibly knowledgeable about all kinds of things you've never heard of. And they talk about it a lot. Okay, raise your hand if you've had this experience. Okay, vast majority of those students are male. Anyone here who was that person in your computer science class? I did this talk at the University of Washington, Ed Lazowska, for any of you who know Ed, he raised his hand, I got him to come up and pretend, but Michael, you can come up and you could be that student for a moment. So this is what, so what happens is that, obviously the fact that these students know so much is very intimidating to the other students. And it's not that they're trying to be intimidating. It's just that they love computer science, and they've never had a chance to talk to anyone about it. So what we do is we have our faculty member have this conversation. Michael, I'm so glad to have you in my class. I got to talk to the intellect. You know, I've rarely had a student who knows as much and is as passionate, and I'm just thrilled you're in CS5 this semester. You know, I'm sure you haven't realized how scary it is to the other students that you know so much. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you. So, you know, if we could have these conversations in private after class, that would be so great. Would that be okay?
It's fabulous.
You see? It works like a charm. Thank you very much. And it's amazing. If you do it once, it pretty much persists. Christine also had this idea, why don't we just offer our first-year students a chance to go to the Grace Hopper celebration? That'd be fun. We live in Southern California. San Diego is 2 hours drive away. It was in San Diego, so she sent an email to all the incoming female students and said, would you like to go? 12 said yes. So we took them, plus 3 males, since we had space for 3 more. This last year, as I mentioned, we took 51, and then we took 8 or 9 upper-level students to be mentors. And so Harvey Med College, 750 students, 86 faculty. We had 63 attendees. We had the highest attendance for the last 2 years of any institution, academic institution at Hopper. We'll do it again in Minneapolis. Okay, changing the intro course. Old course, pretty standard, introduction to concepts in computer science, but the way it's framed is learning program in Java. The new course, computational approaches to problem solving using Python. Okay, so let's start with Python. Java is a perfectly good language. It's used a lot in industry. There are people who love it, there are people who despise it, which is true of most programming languages. But it is less forgiving than some other choices, and Python is more forgiving. Now, there are lots of other courses you could use, programming languages you could use for an introductory course that are more forgiving than Java. The problem is that most of them aren't used in industry, and that's bad because you want your students to take this course and then have the ability to get a summer job and see that what they learned is useful. Python is used a lot in industry. It's a prototyping language. Typically, when you're trying to try something out, you do it in Python, and then when you need to speed it up, you use C or C++ or Java to do that. Okay, so that was part of it. But more important was that it was computational approaches to problem solving. So most of the students coming into MUD have never taken a computer science course, and they hate computers. I mean, it's sort of bizarre, but I think part of it is that the computers that students tend to have access to in high schools, they tend to be slow, they tend to be buggy, and it's just not a great experience. So they arrive looking at this course and dreading it. But if what you're doing is computational approaches to problem solving, there is not a student who comes to MUD who doesn't love to solve problems. I mean, why would you go to science or engineering if you didn't love problem solving? And our faculty made those problems some of the most fun problems you could possibly work on. Moreover, they give the students choices about which problem to solve. So there might be 3 different assignments, and you can pick whichever one you want to do. Now, of course, they're all testing the same knowledge, or not testing, but helping you learn the same knowledge. But one might be in biology, one might be in robotics, and one might be in, I don't know, games, something. Now, the other thing they did was that they basically streamed the class. So we have our colors. I'm guessing that your colors are purple.
Your seminar is purple.
Well, and you're wearing purple, and there's...
No, our colors are
purple
gold.
flowers.
If you look at the poster for your seminar,
Yes.
the color is purple.
Okay.
Our colors are gold and black.
Oh, cool. All right. So our colors are gold and black. Well, it's actually white as well. But so they decided they would separate CS5, the intro course, into two sections. One is called CS5 Gold, and the other one's called CS5 Black. Okay, which one do you think you're more likely to want to be in? What's the good color? Gold, of course. Okay, that's the one for students with no prior experience. Very carefully chosen. We typically have a few students, like out of an incoming class of 196, maybe it's 30 or 40, who are gung-ho about computer science and who've taken a full year of computer science in college already. We put them in CS 42, okay? And it covers both CS 5 and CS 60. And, you know, if you ask why is it called CS 42, something about, you know, the answer to everything in the universe. And what they do is they eliminate macho behavior, just like the way I demonstrated with Michael, in both CS5, and if there's still some that's lingering on by the time that students get to CS60, they do it. Now, I will tell you that having students love, well, so first of all, I'll tell you that the first year we made this change, it went from being the most despised required course by all the students who weren't the Michaels in the class to the most loved class. I mean, it is by far the class that most students say is their favorite class in the first semester. And the typical way they say it, they say, oh, I hate computers, but I love CS5. I just can't imagine what could be more fun. I hate computers. Oh, well, I think I'll take CS60 because it might be just as much fun as CS5. So we don't get them to commit to a major. We get them to take the second course. And then we get them to take the third course, which is CS70. And by the time they take, and of course, in all of those classes, there are lots of women in those classes. So by the time they've done CS70, they're sort of going, I guess I could major in computer science. It's really fun. People are getting great summer jobs. I love the people in my courses. So they have a sense of belonging. They have lots of confidence. And they think it's really interesting. It works. So the problem from all this is the number of majors has tripled. Most of our non-majors have decided that they want to take CS60 and CS70. So classes that were running with 15 or 20 students in them now have 120. But overall, we think it's fabulous. So just before I go to questions and comments, let me just say, it's pretty common for people at a large institution like Purdue to sort of say, well, does any of this make sense for us? You know, I don't know, probably it's not the case that all of your engineering students have to take, I mean, they have to take the Intro to Engineering course and they get a chance to get a sense of what all areas of engineering is, but perhaps they don't all have to take a computer science course. And so let me talk a little bit just about thinking about recruiting more women into areas of engineering when you're in a situation like this where you're admitting to engineering. And you know, one of the things that we know is that if we look at what students look like in high school, if we focus on things like standardized tests, they will underpredict for how well those students, for female students, are going to do in college. Whereas for males, they will overpredict in the sense that it will look like they're doing better. And that's often true for minority students as well. And so I think one of the most important things, and you know, I'm preaching to the choir because this is something that the College of Engineering has really worked on here at Purdue, is really looking at your admissions process to make sure that the criteria you look at in terms of admitting students actually reflect what's going to reflect success once they're actually here. But the other thing, I was at the University of British Columbia for a number of years, and computer science was in the Faculty of Science, and we don't admit to a major, and we didn't have a required computer science course for science majors. We found that one of the things that you could do is you could take the computer literacy course, which was not the introduction to computer science, disproportionately female, like 70% female. Make sure that you make it possible to take both that course and the Intro CS course for credit. Because before, you could only take one of them, so there was no incentive if you did well in the computer literacy course to go on. So we changed that, but we also made sure that the people teaching that computer literacy course actually talked to the students, both male and female, who were doing particularly well in it, and encouraged them just to take the next course. Because almost always, the step is not to convince somebody to be an X, whether an X is an engineer or a computer scientist or a physicist, is to get them to take one more course. And so one of the things that might be worth thinking about is having a joint entry to engineering and science, and then having, and encouraging, or even just encouraging lots of science majors to take the Intro to Engineering course, which I understand is an issue of resources and lots of other things. It's expensive, of course, to teach. But particularly getting more life science students, majors who are disproportionately female, and doing joint majors that worked. 40% of the joint biology computer science majors at UBC today are female. And it's been incredibly, a third of the joint majors across all areas of joint majors with CS are female. So it's been incredibly effective in terms of getting more women. So thank you for listening. Thank you for having me here. And do we have time for questions?
Very, very nice talk, very, very interesting. And one comment or question I have, among the reasons for underrepresentation, you did not talk about the challenges that women face in having a full-fledged career and raising a family. Is that because younger women in high school don't think about that, or what?
Yeah, great question. That was actually a question that Raghu essentially raised earlier. So this fall we did an online mentoring project called WITS on, Women in Tech Share Online, and I think Purdue was involved in it. We had about 600 female mentors at all stages in their career, from just after having finished a bachelor's degree through to some of the most senior women. And we had officially about 15,000 students who signed up for it, but it ended up being more like 4,000 who actually actively participated. And the issue that was most discussed by the mentors, not by the students, but by the mentors, was strategies for combining a career, an ambitious career, with having a family or a personal life. And so that was quite interesting, and there was a very interesting dialogue that went on among those 600 mentors. There were a few undergraduate students who participated in that dialogue, but it seemed like those issues started to become more prevalent a little bit later. So that's one thing. And I mean, it's certainly true that I've been at lots of events where talking to high school students and undergraduate students, and where we've talked about this issue, but what we've the feedback that we've been given is, I'm not really thinking about that yet. And even just 2 days ago, I was at the first Amazon conference celebrating women engineers at Amazon. And one of the panels talked a lot about that. I heard from a ton of the young women that they felt it was inappropriate because there was too much emphasis on it, that they felt that most of the women who were there were not yet thinking about having children. So, okay, nevertheless, it's a really important question because we know that it is an issue. So the first thing I'll say is that the vast majority of women I know who are extremely successful scientists and engineers, and I will say that tends to be who I know, actually have had children. and are really happy that they've had children and have obviously continued to have a successful career. But the vast majority of those people have a couple of things in common. Number one, they have a partner who's very supportive and who really has shared in raising the children, at least on an equal basis. And I'll say I'm married to somebody called Nick Pippinger. As we joke in my family, he's a saint, Saint Nicholas. But you know, I mean, he really did when we were young and our kids were young, we shared it pretty equally. But as I went on to more senior administrative leadership positions, he took on more of it, to the extent that my daughter, about 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we're having dinner in DC, and she says, you know, Mom, you never came to any of my concerts or my softball games, or, you know, Daddy really raised me. I'm going, I did too. She has no memory of it, right? Though she remembers, but it is true that, you know, especially as she grew older, he was the person taking her to the dentist or the doctor or whatever. So number one, supportive partner is incredibly important. Number two, I would say that you only survive raising children, having an ambitious career, if you learn to just not worry about certain things, like how clean your house is, or how clean your car is, or, you know, I mean, if you just, from my perspective, having children is a wonderful thing. Having a career as a scientist or an engineer is a wonderful thing. And there are going to be periods in your life when that's pretty much all you do, if that's what you choose to do. And, you know, Nick and I spent many years when there was a lot of stuff. We saw no movies, we didn't go out to restaurants. Well, you know how I feel about eating in restaurants. You know, where we really just said, our children are small, we really need to be with them, and the only social activities we did was with other families who had children of a similar age, so we could do them together. And, you know, some of our best friends are still the people who had children at the same time as we did, who were in similar fields as ours, and we spent time with them. However, the flip side to all this is it's way easier to do this if you are working in a place that is supportive. And so, for example, I remember I think the second woman hired in mechanical engineering at UBC arrived pregnant and with a child who was 2 years old. And their typical time for having department meetings was 5:30 p.m. Well, childcare, it closes at 5. And they were not a department where bringing very small children to a department meeting was an okay thing. And, you know, when she asked that they would change the time of the department meeting, they refused. It's always been at 5:30 p.m. Couldn't possibly have it at a different time. So really thinking about, you know, the realities of when childcare opens and closes, providing one of the things we found incredibly helpful at MUD is, and I've forgotten the name of it, but it's basically, we pay a certain amount per employee per year, staff and faculty, and it gives them a certain number of hours of emergency dependent care, child care, at a very reduced rate. And it makes all the difference, because if your kid is suddenly sick and you can't take them to child care, you can pay whatever it is, $40 per day, which is not a lot less of what it actually costs, to actually have a trusted professional come and look after your kid on an emergency basis. And so all of these kinds of things, trying to make sure that, you know, it's not that you lower the standards for teaching or for research excellence, but it's you provide a flexible, supportive environment. And, you know, I can tell you, if you have a place that, for instance, has a good partner hiring policy, you can hire way better faculty. So while I was at UBC, as Dean of Science, we increased the number of female faculty from 24 to 48 in 4 years. Of those 48, 16 were married to another person in the Faculty of Science. A bunch of others were married to other faculty members across the school. But I can tell you, we got people where we were competing with MIT and Stanford for faculty members because, one, they knew they either had kids or were going to have kids. They knew that we had a family, a culture that was family friendly, and that they knew that we were willing to move our resources around in order to make it possible to hire partners. And it had a huge impact, and the vast majority of the people who got hired are still there because they're so appreciative of the reality. And I know one of them, her name is Karen McLean, she does haptic interactions. She, PhD at MIT, and I remember when she hired, she said, I never in my life would have thought I would have gone to a place like UBC. I mean, it's so much lower than where I was supposed to go. My advisor can't believe I've taken this step down. But she said, but my husband Rick was hired by Earth and Ocean Sciences, and now I've had my second child, and I'm thriving, and it was the right choice. So, you know, it's one of the things about addressing this issue and making it possible for women and men to be parents and have great careers. That will allow you to hire and retain way better people. They want the reception.
So thank you all for coming. There is food in the back and drink, and again, thank you, Marie.
Thank you.